People like to tell wedding stories as if they were glittering memories, carefully framed in photo albums to be looked back on for a lifetime. For me, it was nothing more than a cold signing of papers in a government office. No orchestra, no floral arch only, the wall clock ticking in the marriage registry. A pale fluorescent light fell across the long wooden table. I sat on the left, wearing a borrowed white dress from a cheap shop. Opposite me was Dominic Carter, 41 years old, a perfectly tailored gray suit, measured gestures. A face so composed it might as well have been carved from marble. The registrar read through the formalities. Dominic signed his name with the same decisiveness he would use to approve a real estate deal. When the pen was pushed toward me, my hand shook so badly I had to bite my lip to keep the letters from collapsing. "It's done," the official said, slapping a red stamp onto the paper. The stamp landed with a dry, final sound, like a chain being locked. My father stood outside the glass door, leaning on his cane, his expression a strange mix of relief and shame. My mother clutched her handbag and avoided my gaze. I knew clearly the house had been saved from foreclosure. I also knew that my youth had just been sold like an item on a ledger. Dominic didn't look at me as we left the building. He only said briefly, "The car's waiting." The black Bentley cut through a city being washed by rain. Water ran down the windshield in long streaks like hundreds of invisible ropes. I curled toward the window and inhaled, but the smell of leather in the car tightened my chest. The penthouse on the 45th floor rose before us like a fortress in a storm. When the door opened, an enormous space flooded in, floor-to-ceiling glass wrapping the skyline. The city below glittered with thousands of lights. But all I felt was cold. I set my small bag on the sofa and slipped off the cheap white shoes my mother had borrowed to buy for me. My feet burned, a reminder that from now on there would be no turning back on this road. Dominic hung his coat, loosened his tie with slow, distant movements. He poured wine into crystal glasses while I stammered for a glass of water. When he handed it to me, our fingers brushed. A strange shiver ran down my spine. We sat opposite each other in the vast living room, the only sound the rain tapping the glass. Dominic spoke in a low, steady voice. "We need to be clear. You will have everything you want: safety, status, money. In return, you have to be my wife in public. As for here," he glanced around the apartment as if marking an invisible boundary, "we each have our own lives." I nodded. My heart ached, but I could not argue. I had agreed to this marriage the same way I had put my signature on that dead-stained paper. Then, unexpectedly, Dominic looked up and met my eyes. In the usual steel gray of them, there was a soft shadow I hadn't expected to see. "Are you afraid?" he asked. His voice so quiet it was almost unbelievable coming from the man known as the Iceman. I bit my lip and whispered, "Yes." He set down his glass, leaned back, his gaze fixed on me. A long silence fell, broken only by the heavy rain. Finally, he said, "Don't be afraid. I won't hurt you, at least not in the way the world thinks of me." Those words were not a promise, nor were they a command. They felt like a small crack opening in a stone wall. I sat very still, my heart racing, unable to tell whether I should believe him or be afraid. The wedding night passed in silence. No roses, no candles, none of the tender sweetness of a girl's dream. Only the rain against the window, the pounding of my own heart, and a beginning that felt more like an imposed contract. I touched the cold ring on my finger. It glittered beneath the light, but to me it was a shackle plated in silver. And I knew, from that moment on, my life had turned onto a road with no return. The first morning in Dominic Carter's penthouse, I woke to a space so unfamiliar it felt suffocating. Sunlight streamed through the tall glass walls, a merciless reminder that my marriage wasn't a fairy tale but a contract. With ink still drying, Dominic was no longer in the room. Only the hollow impression on the pillow, the fading warmth, and his gold watch left behind on the nightstand proved he had been there at all. I stepped into the vast hallway where every polished surface reflected my small figure back at me. The penthouse was luxurious, yes, but to me it felt more like a museum of cold perfection than a home. When I reached the dining room, Dominic was already seated. A new black suit, tie knotted precisely, a folder clipped neatly in front of him. His breakfast was minimalist, just a few slices of toast, a poached egg, and black coffee. He looked up briefly, his gaze slicing across me like an appraisal rather than a glance at a new bride. "Sit," he said. His voice was low, steady, neither harsh nor soft, but heavy enough to sink into me. I sat down. A glass of milk and a croissant had been set in front of my place, clearly not something he would have ordered for himself. Dominic tapped the folder, then pushed it across the table. "I don't like ambiguity. These are the rules of this marriage." I hesitated, then opened it. It wasn't vague words, it was a printed agreement. Detailed and precise, we will appear together at least twice a week at public events. Before the media, we will always present the image of a happy couple. I will handle all household and financial expenses. You will not speak to the press without my approval in private. Our lives remain separate. Bedrooms, friends. Routines, no interference. This contract is valid for 3 years. Each line stabbed like a needle to my chest. I lifted my gaze and met his steel gray eyes, waiting. "You prepared an actual contract." My voice trembled, despite my effort to steady it. Dominic sipped his coffee, his face unreadable. "I don't like surprises. The fewer emotions involved, the easier everything is to control." I clenched my hands under the table. My heart wanted to scream that I wasn't a commodity in his transaction. But my mind reminded me that my family's survival rested on this very paper. And what about feelings? The question escaped before I could stop it. For a heartbeat, something flickered in his eyes, ripples across a frozen lake. Then it vanished. Feelings are not part of the contract. The words slammed the last door shut. I pressed my lips together, nodded faintly, and signed at the bottom of the page. The black ink sank in, sealing once more the truth. I had stepped into a marriage defined by clauses, not by love. Dominic reclaimed the file, slid it into his leather case, and rose to leave. At the door, he paused and turned back. "Amelia." For the first time, he spoke my name, not Mrs. Carter. His tone was still cold, but something ungraspable lingered. "Don't overthink it. This is the only way neither of us gets hurt." The elevator doors closed behind him, leaving me alone in the vast silence of the penthouse. I stared at the copy of the contract still warm with the imprint of my hand. The black and white lines wavered before my eyes like a 3-year sentence. I poured more milk into my glass, forcing myself to swallow. The bland sweetness and bitter edge in my throat told me the truth. My first breakfast with Dominic Carter wasn't about eating food, was about swallowing. The last of my youthful illusions, and yet, beneath the suffocating weight, a small, stubborn spark whispered within me. If this marriage was nothing but a contract, then I would prove that there are things no clause can govern, things written, not in ink, but in the human heart. 3 weeks after signing the marriage papers at City Hall, I still felt like a lost guest in my own penthouse. Everything here was extravagant, modern, and glossy, and yet cold. The floor-to-ceiling glass walls existed to display the cityscape, not to shelter any human heart. I had grown used to waking each morning to find Dominic already gone, his half-drunk coffee left on the table. He left the house very early, sometimes not returning until the next day. I wandered through the vast rooms, touching luxurious objects that gave off no warmth. The kitchen was fully equipped, but rarely filled with the smell of cooking. The living room shone, but showed no sign of life. I tried to fill my days with small things: reading, sketching, tending a few potted flowers on the balcony. Yet every effort felt tiny against the enormous silence of the place. I had expected at least a head butler to speak to me, the kind you read about in fairy tales. Instead, there was only an hourly cleaner who came and went like a shadow. On the rare evenings, Dominic returned. Dinner felt like a meeting. He sat across from me with his laptop beside his plate, lifting his eyes only to nod when I tried to start a conversation. If I asked, "How was your day?" the answer was always concise: busy. One night I put down my spoon and asked quietly, "Do you think this is a real marriage?" Dominic looked up. His gray eyes flashed under the light, but his voice was as even as if he were discussing stock indices. "We have a contract. That is marriage." I wanted to argue, but the words stuck. He said it with the indifference of a man who had never thought marriage required anything beyond paperwork and status. That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat by the glass and looked down at the city, its lit towers like 1,000 different eyes. I felt like one of the small moving shadows below, insignificant, swept along by other people's calculations. One late afternoon, when rain had started to fall, I passed the study. The door was ajar. For a moment, I hesitated. Dominic did not like to be disturbed. But an unusual sound leaked out, not the click of a keyboard, nor the tone of a phone call. It was a heavy, weary breath. I pushed the door open a little. Dominic was hunched in the leather chair. His tie loosened, top shirt buttons undone. His tablet glowed with a cascade of crimson financial charts. He gripped his glass but didn't drink. The man who always appeared composed now looked weighed down, staring at nothing as if he had just lost an invisible battle. I had never seen him like that. The man the press called never trembling now trembled plainly as he set the glass down. "Are you all right?" I asked, my voice so small it nearly blended with the rain. Dominic started, then turned. For a moment, confusion flashed in his gray eyes, as if he'd been caught revealing a secret. He straightened, trying to regain his usual composure. "You shouldn't be here." I stepped forward, worry tightening my chest. "But you look exhausted." He was silent, then sighed, a sound that felt like something cracking. "You wouldn't understand," he said, his voice hoarse. "One wrong decision could put thousands of people out of work. An entire empire could collapse overnight." I froze. For the first time, he wasn't speaking in terms of contracts, clauses, or public image. He was admitting a genuine fear. I didn't know what else to do but say softly, "You can share it. Even if I can't help much, at least you won't be alone." A long silence followed. Dominic looked at me as if he had been torn inside. He shook his head slightly, stood up, and shrugged into his jacket. The fatigue vanished within seconds, replaced by the Dominic Carter everyone knew, the CEO whose world had no room for weakness. "Forget it," he said, his voice steady again. "Just a long day." Then he left, and I was left standing in the hollow, quiet. That night, I sat alone in the dark living room, clutching a pillow, thinking about what I had seen. Dominic Carter, the man the city feared, had cracks. But he hid them behind stone walls, built so high no one could touch them. And I realized something. If I continued to live like this, I would remain a silent shadow in his life. Yet a stubborn longing flickered inside me. I wanted to find a way to get past those walls. Not for the contract, not for appearances, but because I refused to spend my life in a loveless marriage. After that afternoon, when I found Dominic slumped in his study, I could no longer see him with the same eyes. He wasn't just the cold CEO, not merely the man who put contracts where promises should be. He grew tired too. He had moments when he wanted to collapse, and yet Dominic became even more closed off. He still left early and returned late, always appearing in immaculate suits, his gray gaze unreadable. I, however, passed the study door each day and could not forget that heavy sigh I'd heard. One Friday afternoon, rain coming down hard on the street, I returned to the penthouse earlier than usual after running a few errands. The elevator opened onto the glossy hallway leading to the living room. I thought he wasn't home, but voices drifted from the study. The door was ajar. I paused, then stopped completely when I heard Dominic's voice, hoarse, fierce. "No, we cannot let the project fall into their hands. I lost once. I won't lose again." A pause, then his voice tightened. "Don't bring up the old matter. I paid enough for that. One traitor is enough to destroy an empire." My heart clenched. I stepped back and accidentally bumped a crystal vase on a shelf. A soft clink. The door swung open. Dominic appeared, shirt sleeves rolled, his face clouded, his gaze sharp as a blade. "Did you hear something?" I stammered, "Just a little." "I didn't mean to." He looked at me for a long time, as if weighing whether to build another wall. Finally, he exhaled and pulled me inside. The study was strewn with documents, charts, and folders. On the wall hung several enlarged photos, not of family, but of half-finished projects. Company logos crossed out. Dominic sat down, hands clenched, veins standing out. "Do you want to know the truth?" I nodded. He propped his elbows on the desk and looked straight at me. 7 years ago, I trusted one man more than anyone, a partner, a childhood friend. We built the company together from very little. I thought he was like a brother, like family. He paused, a bitter smile twisting his mouth. But in one night, it all collapsed. He colluded with our rivals, took data, contracts, clients. I lost 3/4 of the company's value. Hundreds of employees lost their jobs. The press called it the biggest betrayal of the decade. And I learned one lesson. No one is truly trustworthy. I fell silent. So behind his coldness, there was more than a hurt heart. There was betrayal at work, a blow to trust and to everything he had built. "So how did you pick yourself up?" I asked softly. Dominic's eyes darkened. Then the desk lamp washed a pale sadness across them. "I rebuilt. This time, I wouldn't let anyone get close enough to stab me in the back. No friends, no family. Only contracts, clauses, and absolute control." His voice dropped lower. "That's why I needed a marriage like this. Formalities, advantages. No feelings. Because feelings are openings to be exploited." I looked at him for a long moment, my heart aching with both pity and pain. Part of me wanted to run forward and hold him, to show him there are things that don't measure in profit. But another part saw the walls around him too tall, too cold. I said quietly, "Dominic, I don't know if I can erase those wounds. But at least don't think I'm someone who will betray you. If we must live together, let me be someone you can lean on." He let out a short, dry laugh. "Lean on you? You think you can bear what I carry?" My voice trembled but held firm. "Maybe I can't carry it all. But I can walk beside you. Sometimes that's enough." Dominic's gray eyes wavered, as if the thick stone wall had a hairline crack. He said nothing more, turning back to his papers and pretending to be busy. I noticed his hand freeze for a moment, clenching the pen tighter. That night, as I left the study, my heart felt both lighter and heavier. I had taken a small step through one of Dominic's walls. Yet I understood, to truly reach his heart, the road ahead would be long and rougher than I had imagined. That day, the city's sky darkened by noon, heavy clouds threatening to tear open into a storm. I sat in the penthouse living room with a half-finished novel, though my eyes kept straying to the clock. Dominic rarely came home early, but tonight he had promised dinner with me, something that hadn't happened in 3 weeks. At exactly 7, the door opened. Dominic stepped in, his black suit still immaculate, but his tie loosened, his footsteps weighed down. His face was ashen, his eyes carrying the fury of a storm. Before I could greet him, he threw his leather briefcase onto the table and poured himself a glass of liquor. "Is something wrong?" I asked carefully. He didn't answer right away. He drank in one long pull, then let out a bitter laugh. "He's back. Ethan Morgan." Dominic ground out the name of the man he had once told me about, the traitor, who had stolen 3/4 of his company. He didn't just return. He's taken over our rival firm and announced he'll challenge me directly in the new project. I went silent. Outside, thunder rolled and rain lashed against the glass. Dominic shot up, slamming his hand down on the table. The glass shattered, fragments scattering across the floor. 7 years. His voice was ragged. I rebuilt from ashes every drop of blood, every sleepless hour. And now he wants to take it all again. I rushed to him, catching his hand, already bleeding from the glass shards. He twitched as if to pull away, but then his eyes caught the worry in mine. In that instant, his usual iron strength cracked. "Amelia," his voice broke. Low and hoarse, almost swallowed by the storm outside. "I lost my faith a long time ago. But why is it that when you're here, everything starts to shake?" My heart lurched. For the first time, Dominic spoke my name like a confession. I wrapped a cloth around his hand, pressing gently to stop the bleeding. "You don't have to fight alone. I can't battle in your boardrooms, but I can be here when you stumble." Dominic's storm-gray eyes softened, turning fragile in a way I had never seen. With his uninjured hand, he gripped my wrist firmly, as if anchoring himself. Outside, rain poured as if cleansing the city. Inside the flickering shadows of the penthouse, Dominic was no longer the invincible CEO. He was a wounded man, trembling under old scars. I didn't know what tomorrow would bring. A brutal corporate war, a media storm, or collapse. But in that moment, I knew some walls had cracked, and through those cracks, light was starting to break in. That night, Dominic didn't disappear back to work as usual. He sat quietly by the glass wall, eyes following lightning tearing the sky. I brought him a glass of water instead of more liquor. He took it without a word, his fingers brushing mine, a silent gesture heavier than 1,000 thank yous. The storm outside would pass. But the storm inside Dominic would rage much longer. And from that night on, I knew I no longer wanted to remain a bystander. After the heavy storm, the city seemed to brighten again. But inside the penthouse, the air was stretched taut like a violin string. Dominic left earlier than ever, came home later than before. And every time he stepped through the door, he carried the smell of smoke and pressure with him. I kept up my small ritual. A cup of hot coffee waiting for him the moment he set his briefcase down. At first, Dominic barely glanced at it. But slowly, the cup was always emptied. I knew then it was his quiet way of allowing my presence amid the storms raging in his world. One morning, while I was tucked away in the small library, the sound of the TV startled me. On the screen appeared Ethan Morgan's face, his confident smile cutting like a knife. He was sharply dressed, speaking of a multi-billion-dollar real estate project, and slipped in a barb. "Those who once collapsed will collapse again," the host asked with a hint of amusement. "Do you mean Carter?" Ethan lifted his brow. "In business, the weak always pay." I won't name names, of course. My hand clenched around the remote. Anger burned in my chest. But what made me tremble more was the headline scrolling beneath. Dominic Carter, contract marriage with a 23-year-old love or calculation. A photo flashed, me in my wedding dress, stiff and pale. Dominic beside me, cold as stone. Just one glance, and the judgment was clear. A young girl who sold herself for wealth. And a CEO who bought himself a display wife. That afternoon, I went to the supermarket. Every step was weighed down by stares and whispers. That's her. So young, obviously for money. I bit my lip, lowered my head, and walked faster. For the first time, I felt what it truly meant to live under a microscope. That evening, Dominic came home late, his suit a little rumpled. I tried to hold back, but the words spilled out, shaking. They're calling me a gold digger. They think I married you just to change my life. Dominic stopped in his tracks, then turned to me. His eyes didn't hold anger, but weariness. He set his briefcase down and gently lifted my chin. Do you believe in yourself? I blinked. What do you mean? If you believe in yourself, then don't let the world define you. His voice was low, steady. Let me handle the rest. The only thing that matters is what I believe. Hot tears slid down my cheeks. For the first time, Dominic spoke words that weren't contractual, weren't calculated, but protective. The next day, Dominic brought me to a corporate gala, a room glittering with shareholders and power. Under the glare of flashing cameras, his hand suddenly tightened around mine and did not let go. He introduced me in a voice calm yet resolute. This is Amelia Carter, my wife. I expect her to be shown the same respect you would give me. The room rippled with surprise. Murmurs rose, but the sharp, prying eyes softened, giving way to startled respect. Dominic had never spoken so publicly before. In that moment, I understood he wasn't just shielding his company's image. He was putting his trust in me before the entire world. But I also knew this was only the beginning. The war with Ethan Morgan had just opened its first chapter. And I, though no business strategist, had already become part of the battlefield. News about the showdown between Dominic Carter and Ethan Morgan filled the papers all week. People called it the rematch of two giants. Dominic, the symbol of reconstruction after collapse, and Ethan, the returned man hungry to devour everything. I kept up the habit of watching the reports. But the more I watched, the heavier my heart grew. They weren't just talking about the new project. They were probing Dominic's private life. And my name was dragged into it every time. One morning while I was making coffee, my phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. He'll throw you away like his ex did. Don't delude yourself. I froze. When I looked up, Dominic was stepping out of the bedroom. He saw my pale face and came over. I showed him the screen. He read it, and his eyes darkened. His fist clenched. Ethan, he said, the name like thunder. That night, Dominic had an important shareholders meeting. I had planned not to go, but he surprised me by saying, "You're coming with me. Let them see I'm not alone." I nodded, though my hands trembled. The company boardroom glittered with warm lights, powerful faces filling the long tables. Ethan arrived wearing a smug smile. His gold ring flashed under the lights. He didn't hesitate to walk straight up to us. "Dominic," he extended his hand, voice smooth. "Long time no see. And this must be Amelia." His eyes swept over me, polite on the surface, but laced with mockery. Dominic didn't take the hand. He replied quietly, "Don't drag my wife into your game." Ethan laughed. "Oh, I don't play dirty, not usually. But the public loves behind-the-scenes stories. You know, a CEO marrying a young woman, debts vanish. That sells more papers than financials." The air in the room grew heavy as lead. I forced myself to stay composed, but inside, I boiled. It was clear Ethan didn't only want to beat Dominic on the project, he wanted to destroy him from within, by smearing the fragile trust we were trying to build. After the meeting, Dominic was silent the entire ride home. I sat beside him, fingers intertwined, and finally said softly, "Don't let him break you that way. Ethan wants to see you lose control." Dominic turned to me, his gray eyes deep as the ocean floor. "I lost everything once because I trusted the wrong man. I cannot let that happen again." "But Amelia," he hesitated, voice catching. This time, the one who will pay might be you. I touched his hand, steadier than ever. If I entered this marriage, I chose to go through everything with you. Don't set me aside, Dominic. I am not a burden. I stand with you. For the first time, Dominic did not argue. He squeezed my hand hard, a quiet pact between us. Outside, Ethan Morgan could plan whatever schemes he wanted. But I knew from that moment on, Dominic and I were no longer parallel lives. We stood on the same front line, and that realization filled me with both fear and fierce resolve. Anonymous messages were no longer the worst thing. 3 days after the shareholders' meeting, the press ran a shocking piece of evidence, an email exchange between me and Ethan Morgan. In it, there were fabricated, honeyed lines. If I help you reclaim the company, will you promise to get me away from Dominic? Tomorrow night, at the Astoria Hotel. As we discussed, I read and felt the blood in my veins congeal. Those lines were printed bold across the papers. Beneath them, a photo of me leaving the supermarket the day before, head down, eyes lowered, as if I really had something to hide. My phone rang without stopping. Old classmates messaged, neighbors whispered. Within hours, I had been transformed from a mysterious young bride into the betrayer, a puppet selling herself again. That evening, I sat in the dark living room, my hands ice cold. Dominic arrived late, his shirt rumpled, his face taut. I handed him the newspaper, my voice trembling. "You've read it, haven't you?" He took it, skimmed the pages, and put it down. His eyes were unreadable, a storm contained inside. I was suffocating with fear. "I didn't do it," I blurted, tears welling. I never met Ethan alone, and I never wrote those words. "Dominic, you must believe me." He was silent for a long time. That silence weighed heavier than any accusation. I saw the shadow of Deborah from the past cross his eyes like an old scar being torn open. Finally, Dominic turned away. Voice hoarse, "I want to believe you." I collapsed inward, my chest aching. Want to believe? What did that mean? Did it mean he still doubted me? We ate in a dreadful hush. The warm days in the garden, the piano, they felt as distant as a dream. When Dominic rose to go upstairs, I called softly, my voice breaking. "If you don't believe me, at least let me prove it." He paused, his tall silhouette still beneath the golden light. Then he nodded once, without looking back. That night, I barely slept. I replayed every detail, the phone I used, the times I logged into email. Who could have stolen my identity? The answer pointed to one person, Ethan. He wanted to divide us. And he hit the deepest wound Dominic carried: betrayal. The next morning, I began hunting for proof. I contacted the Astoria hotel manager and asked to view the security footage for the date in the email. The staff hesitated, but when I showed my marriage card with the name Amelia Carter, they reluctantly allowed me to watch. In the footage, the woman entering the room with Ethan was not me, but a blonde whose build resembled mine. I copied the footage to a USB, my heart pounding. This was the chance to turn everything around. That evening, when Dominic returned, I placed the USB on the table. I found it. The woman in the video isn't me. He stared at me, then opened his laptop. When the image appeared, his fingers trembled slightly. In that instant, the icy wall around his eyes cracked. Dominic looked up, voice choking. "I almost left you alone in his trap." I squeezed his hand. "If you still doubt, Ethan wins. But if we stand together, he can't break us." For the first time in days, Dominic held me tight. Outside, the wind still howled against the panes, but inside his arms, I knew I was no longer alone. The battle was far from over. Ethan had struck once; there would be more dangerous blows to come. But I also understood, from now on, Dominic was fighting not only for his empire, but for us, for this marriage, for the fragile trust we were trying to protect. December arrived with winds sharp enough to cut through skin, carrying news that rattled the entire business world. Ethan Morgan had officially filed a lawsuit against Dominic Carter and me. His claim, our marriage was a sham to disguise asset transfers and deceive shareholders. The media erupted. Headlines screamed, "The golden marriage cracks." Carter facing collapse. Old photos resurfaced. My tense smile at the wedding. Dominic's stony eyes. My youthful figure looking out of place beside him. Commentators labeled me the weakest link, the one who would drag Dominic down. On the first day in court, I wore a simple deep blue dress, my hair pinned in a neat bun. My hand trembling faintly in Dominic's grasp. Cameras flashed like lightning, its whispers rising in the hallway. That's Amelia Carter. So young, no doubt it was all a contract. I wanted to lower my head, to vanish. But Dominic's grip tightened, pulling me close. His voice brushed my ear. "Keep your head up. This isn't just my trial, it's ours." Inside, Ethan sat across from us, in a light suit, his smile triumphant, as though the verdict was already his. His lawyer began, voice sharp as ice. "Your Honor, the marriage between Mr. Carter and Miss Amelia is devoid of genuine affection. It is a contractual disguise designed to protect assets and reputation. We present evidence, falsified emails, witness testimony, and irregularities in Carter Group's finances." The accusations rang through the chamber, constricting my chest. But Dominic remained upright, steel-gray eyes unflinching a stone against the waves. Then our lawyer, Jonathan, a silver-haired man who had stood beside Dominic for years, rose. His tone firm. "The court will see that every shred of evidence from the plaintiff is fabricated. We traced the IP address of the so-called affair emails, and it leads directly to a media front company funded by Mr. Morgan. As for the finances, we present independent audit reports proving no illegal transfers occurred." Ethan faltered for a second, then quickly recovered. He stood and pointed straight at me. "And what about her? A 23-year-old girl from nothing, suddenly marrying Dominic Carter. Who here believes that was love?" The chamber buzzed with murmurs. My throat tightened. Before I could speak, Dominic rose, squeezing my hand, his voice deep and ringing. "I do." The room fell silent. Dominic looked at the judge, at the public, then at Ethan. "I believe. I was the one who asked her to marry me. And I will swear before this court, this marriage, though arranged in its beginning, has never been a lie. Amelia had no motive but to save her family, and I, for the first time in years, found someone who made me want to begin again." His voice was rough, but each word struck with weight. I saw surprise, even emotion, flicker across faces in the gallery. The judge struck the gavel, calling the next witness. To everyone's shock, the manager of the Astoria Hotel took the stand. His hands trembled as he spoke. The woman who met Mr. Morgan that night was not Miss Amelia Carter. It was another woman entirely. Surveillance footage confirms this. I was pressured to keep it hidden, but today I tell the truth. Gasps filled the chamber. Ethan's composure cracked. His face darkened. When the session recessed, I sank into my seat, trembling all over. Dominic leaned close, his words only for me. "Thank you for not giving up. Without you, I might have fallen to his games." I smiled through tears. "We haven't won yet." He nodded, eyes alight with resolve. "We will. Not just for the company, but for this marriage." Outside, the storm of public opinion still howled. But in that moment, I understood. Ethan could unleash all the tricks he wanted. Yet there was one thing he could never touch. The fragile, hard-won trust Dominic and I were choosing to hold on to. On the day of the final verdict, the city sky was unusually clear. Winter sunlight spilled across the courthouse steps. a soft golden glow that seemed to sweep away all the weeks of darkness behind us. I held Dominic's hand tightly as the judge's solemn voice echoed. In the case of Ethan Morgan versus Dominic Carter and Amelia Carter, the court hereby dismisses all charges. The marriage of the defendants is recognized as legal and valid, with no evidence of fraud. The plaintiff shall bear all court costs and compensate the defendants for defamation. The courtroom erupted in murmurs, cameras snapping furiously. I turned to Dominic. His face remained composed, yet the hand holding mine trembled slightly. When his steel-gray eyes met mine, I understood. This was not merely a legal victory, but the moment he was finally freed from years of ghosts. Ethan sat frozen, his face drained of color. His glare shot toward us, but there was no longer any power behind it. The storm he had summoned had swallowed him whole. As we left the courthouse, reporters swarmed. "Mr. Carter, any comment?" "Amelia, do you regret entering this marriage?" Dominic didn't answer. Instead, he wrapped his arm firmly around my shoulders, shielding me from the flashing bulbs and shouted questions, leading me straight to the waiting car. When the door shut, the chaos outside was cut away. I looked at him and saw something I'd never seen so clearly before. Peace. We won. I whispered. Dominic leaned over and brushed his lips against my forehead. "No, Amelia, you won. You made me believe again." Weeks later, the house on the hill was transformed. No longer silent, it now echoed with our voices at dinner, the sound of piano keys filling the music room, the rhythm of 2 sets of footsteps in the rose garden. One evening, as the sunset painted the roses in gold, Dominic led me to the stone bench at the edge of the garden. In his hand was a small velvet box. "We began with a contract," he said, voice low but warm. "But today, I want to tear up every clause. I want to start over with a real proposal." I froze as he opened the box. Inside lay a simple ring, a slender band of gold set with a single bright stone. Not dazzling, not ostentatious like the first one, but quietly beautiful. "Amelia," Dominic said. His gray eyes softened. "Will you marry me this time? Not for family, not for debts, but only for us." Tears spilled freely as I nodded, smiling through the sobs. "Yes." He slipped the ring onto my finger, then pulled me into his arms. In that moment, I knew. For the first time, our marriage was no longer a burden. It was a choice. A choice made by 2 hearts that had weathered the storm together. 5 years later, the villa was no longer silent. Children's laughter rang down the hallways, mingling with the piano melodies Dominic and I sometimes played. In the garden, white roses bloomed brilliantly, each one cared for with his quiet devotion. I sat on the veranda, cradling our baby daughter, while Dominic chased our 3-year-old son along the stone path. The sunset bathed him in light, not the cold CEO the world once feared. Not the man haunted by betrayal, but a father, a husband, whole in love. I closed my eyes and drew in a deep breath, my heart overflowing with peace. From a forced marriage, we had built a home. From old scars, we had written a new beginning, and I understood, sometimes, what feels like chains are, in truth, doors to freedom if we dare to trust, to stay, and to love with all our hearts. Perhaps what lingers after this story is not just the victory in court, but the journey of 2 people who transformed from obligation into choice. Dominic and Amelia proved that true love does not begin with perfection, but with trust, fragile as it may be, and with the small steps we choose to walk together. Thank you for listening with Snail Story. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like, subscribe, and leave a comment sharing your thoughts.